There's my wife in the Challenger. Hoo-ah! Yeah, there's no keeping up with her.
It's time to make this XR400 street legal and run a little bit better. This is stage 1 in XR400 project.
So as you can see, I got the plate on there. I just made a simple bracket out of aluminum. Made one piece come down, bolted the second piece to it, bolted the plate to that. That's not going anywhere. This is a little wiggly, but it'll be fine. It'll stay on there. Step 2 is get the carb out, and I'm just going to take it apart, clean it, put it back together with some new gaskets, O-rings and whatnot. Hopefully it'll start easier, because right now it's having a little bit of trouble starting, so we'll see what happens. Step 3 of this build, this part of the build, right now it's got a tail light that comes on, but no brake light. I got a pressure brake light switch to replace the banjo bolt, and that'll run a wire up the rear subframe to the tail light and illuminate the brake light when I hit the rear brake. Step 4 is get rid of the exhaust baffle and the intake plug. Gas in the eyes. That's good for him.
Hey guys, removing and overhauling a carburetor can be a daunting task to some people. I want to tell you that the hardest part was removing it first from the bike. The easiest way is to first remove the rear subframe and air filter box, but on a lot of older bikes this is not necessary. It can usually be wiggled out one way or another after the fuel line and throttle cables are disconnected.
So I got me all balls, air cutoff valve, then Tusk carburetor rebuild kit, put in some new parts, make sure everything's working good. Let's get after it.
Actually overhauling the carb is typically pretty simple. The most important thing is to keep track of all the little screws, jets, and O-rings and make sure they all go back in the same way. Also be mindful that certain adjustment screws are set in a position, so it's important to record the number of turns when removing and reinstall it to the same setting. They may need to be adjusted after the carburetor goes back in anyway, but at least you'll have a known starting point.
Alright, carburetor's back in. Throttle is working. Hopefully it's adjusted. The kit gave me a knurled adjustment knob there that there's no way I can adjust that with my fingers, so it's kind of pointless, but might be able to get in there with a stubby screwdriver if I have to. That's idle air, I believe. Bypass or something. I'll have to look it up. Last thing I want to do for streetability and rideability and reliability is check the valve lash. So your intake valves under these caps on either side of the cylinder, exhaust valves here. I believe it's 4 thousandths clearance on intake, 6 on exhaust. I don't know when the last time that was done was, so we're going to rip those caps off of there and check those and tighten them up. Get breaker bar. Alright, next thing to do when checking the valves is you got to get the cylinder at, or the piston at top dead center. To do that, you can turn the crank manually under this cap, and there's timing marks under this cap. So first thing I'm going to do, suck, squeeze, bang, blow, right? Intake, compression, power, exhaust strokes. The piston is at top dead center at the top of the compression stroke. So that's after intake, so we want to turn this until we see those intake valves start to open. So there go the exhaust valves. There go the intake valves. Now, there's two little marks on the flywheel. Those are your timing marks that indicate top dead center, but you line it up with the top of this hole has a little notch. It's like you line it up like a gun sight. Just like that. This front right exhaust valve definitely has too much. To tighten them, you undo this jam nut, just loosen it, put your feeler gauge between the rocker arm and valve opener, and then tighten this top screw until your feeler gauge can just move in and out a little bit. So let's get that done. 4/1000 feeler gauge. It's bent because I've done this a number of times. Make sure your gauge is fairly clean. Any debris can give you a false reading. Tighten it until it's just difficult or given some resistance on that feeler gauge. Now, make sure your screwdriver doesn't move. Tighten that jam nut and move on to the next one. It's always a good idea to double check when you've tightened it to make sure you can still get that feeler gauge in there and it still has a little bit of resistance. 4 on the intake, 6 on the exhaust is pretty common. I remember my Husqvarna was like that. That was the same clearances. Same clearance, Clarence. That's it. Adjustment done. More modern bikes, like my Husky and a lot of other bikes I've worked on, are going to have shims. This is kind of old school tech with the screw, but I mean it works fine. The shims, I suppose you can get a little bit more accurate. Adjusting your valves to the proper clearance will also improve starting ability. That's also a really good way to tell if your valves need adjustment, is if it starts being difficult to start the bike. That's a good sign. This is the snorkel plug. I'm just going to pull that bad boy out. Okay, that's trash. Next is the exhaust baffle. It's got to go. Let's see if we can get that out.
I peeled off the aftermarket XR decals that the previous owner had put on the massive Achirby's tank. The tank is textured and decals are really meant to go on a smooth surface, so they had already started to peel, and the glue was a bitch to get it all off with acetone. I'm sure the previous owner put them on to look good and help the sale, but I would have preferred he left them off.
Alright, next step, street legality. I have an inline brake light pressure switch from Vortex. This guy should replace the top banjo bolt in the rear brake master cylinder. I checked the bulb while it was running. Both filaments are illuminated. If you look, he's got both wires. One side's going to be ground, and the other two are the other two filament wires. So I just got to figure out which one of those two white wires illuminates which one of these filaments, and then I should just be able to interrupt it with that switch.
Putting in the new brake light switch was pretty simple. If you're careful, you don't even need to bleed the rear brake line after. After snugging it down in the master cylinder, running a pair of wires to interrupt the light circuit is super simple. Just take care to keep them away from the hot exhaust pipes and any sharp edges, and secure them well with quality zip ties.
Morning, just going to work. Still getting used to how this thing starts compared to my XR250. The XR, I don't crank the throttle at all. With this one, it seems to like it when I give a few cranks before I kick it. I'm going to change the gear ratio on this thing, and I wanted to get a top speed run in before I did that. I think this is the factory gearing. One thing's for sure, I don't like not having a mirror on the road. I like seeing who's around me. Alright, let's hit it! Boy, this thing's got some pep now. That was pinned back there on the exit ramp. I got her up to close to 80. This is a 5-speed, unlike the 250 is a 6-speed. I don't like going that fast on a dirt bike. It's pretty twitchy. Let's see if she can do it again. Pinned. So it seems like on flat ground, wide open throttle, 80 miles an hour is about it. If it'll hit 80. 75 really, realistically. But who's going 75 on a dirt bike anyway? It's pretty scary. All I wanted to know really was how the RPMs are around 55, 60, 65 miles an hour. And they're still pretty high, but I think if I re-gear it, it'll still do 55. No problem. But I'm gonna find out. But the gearing will really help on the dirt for sure. I'm sure of that.